Good Erev Shabbos, Parshas Vayakhel-Pekudaei. It's a double Parsha this week. And it also happens to be Parshas HaChodesh. In the middle of Pekudaei, at the end of Perek Lamites, Pasuk Chaf Mem Gimel, the Torah says, Moshe saw all the amazing accomplishments that Bnei Israel had achieved in building the Mishkan. Vayivarech osam Moshe. And Moshe blessed them. What was the blessing? It doesn't actually state in the Torah the bracha that Moshe gave. The Torah goes silent at this point. So Rashi, based on the Medrash, fills out the picture and says, this is the bracha. Yehi rotzon shetishra shchina b'masei yadechem. That may it be Hashem's will that his shchina should dwell on the productivity of your hands, on the product of your hands. Which means Bnei Israel had just constructed the Mishkan, and now Moshe is giving a bracha that the shchina should dwell in the Mishkan. That's the simple pshat of the pasuk as explicated by the Midrash. However, there is an essential problem with this understanding, and that is, why did Moshe have to give this bracha altogether? Just go back several psukim or a parak or two, and we have the promise that Hashem says to Bnei Israel, that Hashem says that they will make for me, Bnei Israel shall build a Mishkan, a sanctuary, and I will dwell amongst them. So the bracha has already been given by Hashem himself. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu have to state the bracha, if this indeed is the bracha that Moshe stated? I would suggest that there are two ways to understand Moshe's bracha as recorded by the Medrash. Yehi ratzon shetishra shchina b'masei yadechem. So the first way we can understand this is that every person has an inner and outer core. We have an inner self and an outer self. And it's one thing for Hashem's bracha that the Shechina should dwell within us, bisocham, within each and every one of us. It means that in our hearts, we are Jewish. In our hearts, we have values. In our hearts, we have a sense of spirituality. But we don't want to be too public about it. It's private. And that is an ethos within the society in which we live. People shouldn't wear their religion on their sleeves. And maybe there are positives and maybe there are negatives to it, but what the bracha of Moshe Rabbeinu is saying is that Shetishra Shchinascha b'masei yadechem, that it's not sufficient that it should be in our hearts and in our souls and a private matter. But we should wear our religion on our sleeves. We should conduct ourselves in a way, certainly, that wearing religion on our sleeves would be a great compliment and be a great Kiddush Hashem. But we should wear it on our sleeves. It reminds me of two seminal events that occurred within the last 20 years. One was a famous story that occurred when the Malton Mills factory burned down, and the owner, an Orthodox Jew, continued to pay his employees for several months after the factory had burnt down. And while he most certainly could have legitimately, claimed that he had no responsibility going forward, but he stated, based on his Jewish religious values about what the Torah says to him, that he was going to continue doing so. And everybody knew that he was an Orthodox Jew, and everybody knew that he represented what it means to be a Jew. So when we wear our religion on our sleeves and we act in a way in which the Shechina is not just within us, but we take those values and we let everyone know that when we act in honorable ways, that is a reflection of our of who we are as B'nai Torah and B'nos Torah. Then that is the bracha. That is the fulfillment of the bracha of Shetishra Shechina b'maseh yadechem. That the Shechina should dwell not just in our hearts, not just in the privacy of our own homes, but b'maseh yadechem. Maseh yadechem means the product of our hands that everyone can see. And that leads us to a second interpretation, which is actually the cornerstone for this first. And the second interpretation is that a person has to live in harmony and in balance. That it's one thing for Hashem to give the bracha that the Shekhinah should dwell within us. But dwelling within us is not sufficient. We have, as human beings, the extraordinary capability to hold values in our hearts and in our minds, but not actually act upon them in our in our lives. There's so many challenges to doing the right thing. It's quite often difficult. But even with the challenges to doing the right thing, the bracha is shetishra shchina b'masei yadechem, that we take the values of the Ribono Shel Olam who has instilled within us through the Torah HaKadosha, those very values, those guidelines, those mitzvahs that animate us and guide us and vitalize us, they should not remain simply within the privacy of our thoughts and our minds. But we should live a life in which our actions reflect those values. Too often, perhaps ourselves, perhaps we've seen it in others, where there is a disconnect between the stated values of what it means to be an Orthodox Jew, between what it means to be a person who has fidelity and loyalty to Torah Hashem, and then how we act and how we conduct ourselves. Too often we trade in the timeless values for momentary gain. The bracha that Moshe says is, now that we have the Mishkan, Yehi Ratzon, Shetishra Shechina B'masei Yadechem, it's not good enough for it to stay in the shul. It's not good enough for it to stay in the Mishkan. It's not good enough for our values to be held within the classically religious environment. But B'masei Yadechem, out there in the world, that our external lives should reflect our internal lives, and we should live in a harmonious balance. And if we do that, then that brings us back to the first bracha of Shetishra Shchina B'masei Yadechem. If we want to be public about wear our religion on our sleeves, as that bracha demands and that bracha calls us to, then we also have to make sure that our actions reflect our internal values. The bracha of Shetishra Shchina B'masei Yadechem is twofold, and one is built on the other. I'm reminded of another story just several years ago. Rabbi Noam Yurov, who was reported widely in the press, had found $98,000 in a piece of used furniture that he had purchased, and the owner of that original owner of the furniture had no idea that the $98,000 that they had been missing was hidden inside that desk, inside that furniture. When he and his wife found it, they returned it immediately to the owner. And as a rabbi, as somebody who's a public persona, somebody who is demonstratively and visibly Jewish, created an extraordinary Kiddush Hashem. And the extraordinary Kiddush Hashem is because Shetishra is a fulfillment of a commitment to living the bracha of Shetishra Shchina B'masei Yadechem, that our external values should reflect, our external actions should reflect our internal actions. And when we do that, we can confidently live the second bracha. We can wear our religion on our sleeves and let everyone know far and wide that this individual who represents kindness and goodness and honesty and integrity and spirituality and a commitment to all the principles of Ben Adam L'Chavero and Ben Adam L'Makom, some of which are readily understandable by the public, and some of our practices which are not easily understandable. But when we live a life in which our external actions reflect our internal values, then we can confidently wear our religion on our sleeves. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu give us the strength, the wisdom, the courage, and the commitment to hold on to the bracha of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Tishra Shchina B'Maaseh Yadechem. Good Shabbos to us all.